Hey there, I am glad you're here. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do subscribe. In this part of the story, we shall see how Kyle, Killer, Martinez, and Agent Sarah ventures out deep into the mountains again to uncover questions. The first part to the story is linked here in the description. Now, get comfortable. Here I begin. I woke up with a jolt, my heart racing, my body drenched in sweat. The soft hum of the helicopter's blades still lingered in my ears, the whir of the rotors never quite leaving me. It wasn't just the noise that haunted me, it was the memory of the encounters. Dead teammates, rotten flesh, those creatures, have been into several operations, but this was new. I blinked hard, forcing the sleep away. I was in a sterile, white room now, the faint glow of fluorescent lights overhead casting harsh shadows. I tried to move, but my body felt like it was weighted down, every limb heavy. The last thing I remembered was the helicopter. Sarah slumped beside me, her face grim. I must have passed out from the exhaustion, the physical and mental strain catching up with me. As I tried to shake the fog from my head, I realized we were back at HQ. The familiar, oppressive walls of the Fort Sable Army headquarters surrounded me. It sat miles away from the Blue Mountains in a secluded valley. To keep the secrecy, these camps are hidden from the public eye. Surrounded by evergreen canopy. Fort Sable wasn't just a place, it was a fortress. Quite serene, yet some of the chambers conceal secrets that the military won't let out at any cost. The seniors tell us that it is to keep the balance, yet we know shady things happen behind closed doors. Nobody dare to question. You know there is a cost to patriotism. The sounds of soldiers moving, rifles clinking against their gear, and the general murmur of military life seeped into the room as I slowly stood. Sarah was already awake, sitting across from me. Her eyes were pale, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice rough. "They want a report," she said, her tone flat. "A full one. What we saw out there." She let out a long sigh. "I hate this part. The aftermath." Before I could ask more, the door opened. A man stepped in. Senior Sergeant Hunter, our interrogator. He was short, yet built like a bulldozer, was a former bodybuilder during his initial days, with a jawline so sharp it could cut through glass. His uniform was crisp, his expression colder. Hunter was all business, no time for pleasantries, which suited me just fine. "Sergeants Martinez and Sarah," he began, voice low and measured. "You've both been through stuff, but that doesn't excuse what you saw out there. HQ is very clear. We're not leaking this to the public. Understood?" I raised an eyebrow, my gaze narrowing. "Leaking what?" "The truth." His eyes flashed, a brief flicker of irritation before he masked it. "The public doesn't need to know everything. You'll both file your reports, stick to the facts, and that's it. No more. Understood?" I wasn't sure if it was the exhaustion, the frustration, or the haunting images of the cave still fresh in my mind, but I wanted to tell him to shove it up his ass. Instead, I just nodded, as did Sarah. Hunter gave us a brief nod of approval before leaving, and the door clicked shut behind him. Sarah sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Think they're going to bury this?" I asked, trying to shake off the tension. "The truth." She didn't answer right away, staring into her cup like it held all the answers. Finally, she looked up at me, a flicker of something dark in her eyes. "I don't know. They want control. Always have." The silence between us grew thick, and I couldn't help but wonder if this was just the beginning of a much bigger mess. A part of me wanted to go back to the mountains, wanted answers. Maybe it is just the exhaustion and the bad dreams. A week of needles, saline bags, and a whole cocktail of vaccines was enough to make me want to crawl into a hole and stay there forever. I couldn't remember the last time I'd had a solid meal or a full night's sleep. Every day, they shoved more tests into us, checking for rabies, strange infections, something that could explain the damage done to our bodies. The bites and scratches we sustained didn't just leave scars. They left us feeling wrong. Sarah and I endured the barrage of medical procedures together, But it didn't make it any easier. They even made us sit through psychiatrist sessions, which felt like nothing more than an exercise in futility. The PTSD treatments were a joke. How could anyone truly process what we had seen out there? You don't get over something like that. Not when you've watched your team torn apart by creatures that I didn't believe even exist. Before I used to laugh off even at the slight hint of such terms. Bigfoots, dogmen, wendigo, all kinds of bullshit. But now, my brain's got a fucking rewire. The nights were worse. Sleep was nothing but an endless loop of nightmares. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bodies, my teammates' mangled corpses, their eyes staring at me from the darkness. Didn't take sleep medications ever since I got over my first kill. You know, the first kill changes you entirely. Was a close combat. Had to finish off a terrorist with a knife strike deep into his chest. Blood gushed all over my face. Kinda felt like being reincarnated. Since then, no sleep medications. The Bigfoots, those eyes, their breath, even the slight gaze of my viper edge knife now gave me fucking chills. I tried everything to block it out. Dating apps, playing stupid games, even tried preparing different dishes from one of the YouTube channels. Didn't work. The images wouldn't stop. No matter how hard I tried, sleep came in fits and starts, like a damn tease. One night, I gave up trying to sleep altogether. It was just 1 hour after midnight, and I reached for my phone, almost without thinking. Sarah was probably awake too. She didn't seem like the type to sleep much these days. Called her. It rang once, twice, then she picked up. "What's up, Martinez?" Her voice was raspy, rough, like she'd been up for days too. "Can't sleep," I said, my voice a mix of frustration. "You awake?" "Of course, I'm awake," she said with a chuckle, though there was a tiredness to it. "You want to talk about it, or what?" I smirked, but the exhaustion in my voice made it sound more sarcastic than playful. "You want to just get a drink?" Her laugh was low, almost teasing. "You're lucky I'm not in my pajamas. But yeah, a drink sounds good. Meet me in 30. I stared at my phone, the screen still glowing in the dark. To drink? At this hour? I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something normal. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to shake off the tension that had been building up. Maybe this was what I needed. Just a night to forget. I threw on my jacket, grabbed my Desert Eagle, just in case, old habits die hard, and stepped into the crisp night air. After all those killings back in the forest, I cannot shake off the feeling that one might just be waiting here, to hunt me down. The city was quiet, it wasn't much, but it was enough. Sarah lived just a few blocks away in a decent part of town, away from the humdrum of military life. Her place wasn't far, but the walk felt longer than usual. The streets felt empty, eerily so. It was like I could still feel the weight of the blue mountains, the suffocating darkness, lingering around every corner. My fingers drummed against the handle of my gun, an old habit from years in the field. I arrived at Sarah's place, an apartment building tucked in a quieter neighborhood. The lights were off in most of the windows, the place giving off a comfortable, lived-in vibe. She buzzed me in, and when I reached her door, it swung open before I could knock. She stood there in a pair of loose jeans and a worn-out hoodie, her hair pulled into a messy bun. No makeup, no pretense, just Sarah, and her perfect shape. "You're early," she said, giving me a sly smile as she leaned against the doorframe. "You're not," I shot back, grinning. She rolled her eyes and stepped aside, letting me in. "I didn't know what you needed, beer or whiskey?" "Something strong," I said, sinking into her couch. "The stronger, the better." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sound the occasional clink of glass. Sarah poured herself a drink, and I did the same. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. The weight of what had happened was still there, between us. But in the stillness of her apartment, I could almost pretend that things were normal, that nothing had changed. "So," she said after a long pause, "what now?" I swirled the drink in my glass, not looking at her. "I don't know. Everything feels off. Like we're still in it, even though we're out." She gave a small laugh. Welcome to the club, Martinez. You think you can outrun that nightmare? It doesn't work that way. You got a boyfriend? I asked her, trying to sound funny. She replied, I know, that's not the question you wanted to ask about. I didn't have a response. Instead, I just took a long drink. But for now, all I had was the silence and the whiskey. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The night had settled over us, muffling the sounds of the world outside. Wanted a cigarette so bad, even though I know she doesn't appreciate the habit. For now it was all about savoring the burn of the whiskey as it slid down my throat. For a moment, I let myself pretend that we were just two people having a quiet drink, like normal folks. No damn ghosts, no government conspiracies, no bodies torn apart in caves. Sarah sat across from me, swirling her own glass. We couldn't pretend forever. So, Sarah finally broke the silence, her voice low but serious. What now, Kyle? I looked at her, taking in the way her eyes had darkened since the rescue. I don't know, I admitted, letting my shoulders slump. Everything feels off. I can't shake the feeling that there's more to all of this, more than we're being told. The BigFoot, the secret research, the attack. It's not just some freak occurrence. This is something bigger. We've seen the surface, but there's a whole deep, dark world behind it. Something's going on, and I think it's being kept from us. Sarah sat up a little straighter, her eyes narrowing. She'd always been sharp, a trait I respected. You think it's all tied to the government? The way they just swept everything under the rug? No answers. No explanations. She leaned in slightly, as though to make sure I wasn't imagining things. Kyle, I've been thinking the same thing. And you know what? I'm tired of not knowing. I need to see it for myself. She was right. We needed answers. We couldn't just sit around, pretending everything was fine, hiding behind military secrecy. So, we made a plan right away. We knew it wouldn't be easy. The headquarters was just a short drive away from the city. Tonight we had to open some dirty doors. We were rangers, after all. We had been trained to slip through cracks. So why not now? We made our move. We didn't talk much, not because we didn't have things to say, but because we both understood the gravity of what we were about to do. Sarah grabbed her old military-issued jacket, and I tossed on my gear, the weight of my gun a constant reminder of what was at stake. We left her apartment and took the bike, Kawasaki Ninja 1000SX that had been her ride that we were heading straight for Fort Sable, needed to uncover the truth. I knew the base was tightly secured, with military personnel always on high alert, but I wasn't worried. Sarah had a way of getting in places unnoticed, and with a little planning, we could slip past the guards and into the restricted areas without anyone knowing. The ride was quiet, the hum of the engine the only sound in the otherwise empty night. It was almost peaceful in a way, almost. When we arrived, we parked behind a few trees near the perimeter fence. The walls of the compound loomed in front of us, their barbed wire gleaming. Yet this wasn't a problem. We'd already studied the patterns, where the guards patrolled, the blind spots in their rotations, and how the cameras scanned the area. We knew exactly what we had to do. Ready? I whispered as I turned off the engine, the soft rumble fading into the night. Sarah nodded, her face set in that determined, no-nonsense way I was all too familiar with. Let's do this. We slipped through the shadows. The quiet hum of machinery was the only thing keeping us company as we navigated through the security gates, bypassing cameras by moving in short bursts from one shadow to the next. We crawled under security fencing and slipped into the belly of the beast without so much as a sound. Once we were inside, the adrenaline kicked in. We knew the hallways well enough to navigate them without much trouble. But we were headed somewhere, lower levels, the underground labs that not even the highest-ranking officers had access to, except the fucking secret groups, white and black-coated men dressed like fucktards, walking like they can bypass any military protocol. I feel the urge to sucker punch one in the face. Stay close, I muttered under my breath as we approached the elevator shaft. We had planned this part carefully, using old maps of the facility to pinpoint the secret rooms below the surface. The elevator descended quietly, and we knew it was our only shot. Once the doors opened, there was no going back. The elevator slid open. We were in what seemed like a medical area. It was sterile, the white lights above flickering occasionally, casting shadows across the cold floors. We moved quickly, walking silently past rows of rooms, most of them empty, but one caught our eye, a locked door at the end of the hall. "Wait here," Sarah whispered. She'd already pulled out a set of tools from her bag, the metallic click of her lockpicks the only sound as she worked. Within seconds, the door clicked open. The room was dark, save for a few emergency lights overhead. But what we found inside, damn, the smell was more putrid than even the cave's interior. In the center of the room, there was a large, reinforced cage, and inside a creature. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't like anything I'd seen before. This one was different. Its chest heaved with shallow breaths, and I could see how thin it had become. Looked nothing more than a broken shell. It took labored breaths, eyes shut, maybe sedated, its massive limbs shackled, and the tubes connected to its body were feeding it some kind of unknown fluid. In an unexpected way, it was sad. "This isn't the creature we fought," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my gaze lingering on the creature as it shifted weakly in its cage, trying to look up at us with its deep, exhausted eyes. "They've been testing on it," I said, my voice tight with both anger and pity. "This one's been tortured for however long they've had it here." Sarah stepped forward, carefully approaching the cage, her face a mix of disgust and empathy. "We should put it out of its misery." But I didn't know what to say. The creature wasn't a monster. It was a victim, and the realization struck me like a punch to the gut. As much as we'd fought to survive, we were now standing in front of a broken thing, one that had been manipulated and abused by mankind. "We'll figure out what to do later," I said, tearing my gaze away from the creature. "Right now, we need to get out of here." "Holy shit," I muttered under my breath. "They're experimenting on them." Sarah was already pulling up a nearby console, her eyes scanning the screen. The words on the display were chilling. DNA extraction, hybrid weapon testing, subject 42. "We need to get out of here," I said quickly. We had enough answers for the night. We turned and bolted for the door. We couldn't risk getting caught now, not after what we'd uncovered. As we moved, I spotted the security cameras again, and without thinking, I reached for the control panel Sarah had hacked into earlier. We erased all the footage of us, leaving no trace of our intrusion. We made our way back to the elevator with careful steps. When the doors finally slid shut behind us, I exhaled the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Let's go," Sarah said, her eyes locked on the exit. As we made our way back to the bike, adrenaline still coursing through my veins, I knew one thing for sure. We needed more answers. As I rode the bike, accelerated it slow to comfort my brain, Sarah tapped in my shoulder. "Your place, Kyle." I hadn't expected her to stay the night. But she did. I was used to being alone. I'd always been alone, ever since I could remember. My place was more of a sanctuary than a home, a space I'd built with the remnants of my military career and the faint echoes of a past that seemed to fade as the days went on. My apartment wasn't a place of elegance or comfort, it was functional. No frills. No unnecessary noise. It was just me and the things I needed, a solid base of operations. But somehow, in the chaos of the night, Sarah had ended up there, and neither of us seemed to mind. My living room was, well, it wasn't what you'd expect from a typical bachelor pad. The couch, an old leather thing, was worn but comfortable, situated near a low coffee table littered with old military manuals, maps, and a few empty cans of beer. Next to that was a cluttered bookshelf, filled with everything from tactical gear manuals to science fiction novels. I wasn't ashamed of my nerdy side. I loved the escape, the worlds that didn't require you to fight for every breath. The walls were covered in faded maps of various operations, places I'd been, places I planned to return to, but everything was meticulous. Even the walls that weren't covered in maps had framed photographs of military friends who had long since faded into the ether, their faces still frozen in moments of happiness that felt worlds away. I lived alone, by choice. My parents lived out in the country. They had a simple farm, and as much as I loved them, the place felt too distant, too quiet. I'd always been someone who needed to stay close to the action, to feel like something was happening. That's why I'd chosen to live in the city, even if it wasn't exactly home. It was convenient. It was safe. And I could keep an eye on things. The silence in my apartment wasn't suffocating, it was comforting. That was until Sarah walked in. She'd made herself at home as much as she could, sitting on the couch, eyes scanning the surroundings. There was something almost amusing about watching her try to find something to do with her hands, like she was trying to make sense of my world of tactical gear and chaos. "You're a bit of a nerd, aren't you?" she said, her voice a teasing lilt. I raised an eyebrow and shot her a smirk. "Just a bit. You got a problem with it?" She snorted, clearly amused. "No, just didn't expect it. Looks like someone has a thing for science fiction and heavy artillery." "Gotta stay sharp," I said, shrugging, trying to make it sound like a joke, though there was truth in it. Never know when the next alien invasion or insurgency is gonna hit. She laughed, the sound warm and light. "So, you spend your nights with aliens and guns, huh?" I gave her a sly grin. "Better than spending them alone." Her smile faltered for a split second, and I could tell she'd heard the hint of something more in my words. But then she brushed it off, taking another sip of her drink. We didn't talk much after that. The hours slipped by unnoticed as we lounged on the couch, trying to forget what had happened, trying to distract ourselves from the gravity of the world. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, Sarah's head resting lightly on my shoulder, her body curled next to mine. I woke up the next morning to the smell of coffee. The sun was barely up, casting a soft glow through the blinds. It took me a second to remember where I was, why my couch felt warmer than usual. And then I saw her, still asleep next to me, her hair tangled, face relaxed in a way I hadn't seen before. For a moment, I considered waking her. But I didn't. I just watched her breathe, appreciating the quiet moment. The whole world felt like it could wait for a bit. Eventually, she stirred, letting out a soft groan as she rubbed her eyes. "What time is it?" she muttered, stretching. "Early," I replied, glancing at the clock on the wall. "We've got work to do." She propped herself up on one elbow, her gaze flicking to me with a half smile. "You know, you're not half bad for a military nerd." I chuckled, tossing the blanket off of me. I try to keep my charm in check. She laughed again, a sound that made everything seem a little less heavy. But even as she smiled, I could see the shift in her eyes. She was thinking about what lay ahead. We both were. The Blue Mountains, Eagles Ridge Road again. It was late afternoon when we finally got moving. After a quick breakfast, nothing fancy, just a couple of eggs and some toast, we gathered our things. I changed into a set of civilian clothes. Cargo pants, a plain t-shirt, and my worn-out boots. Sarah did the same, keeping her look casual but military efficient. I noticed the way her jacket fit her, the curves of her form, beautiful against the morning light. It made my thoughts wander, and I quickly pushed them aside. We had a job to do. We grabbed some guns, ammunition too, grabbed my keys, and we headed out to the garage. It was a small setup. My Ford truck sat parked in the corner, a sturdy, no-nonsense vehicle that had seen its fair share of miles. The engine came to life as I pulled it out, and Sarah climbed into the passenger seat, looking comfortable in her own right. Before we pulled out, I saw my neighbor, Mike, standing in his driveway, smoking a cigarette and giving me an amused look. Mike was the kind of guy who liked to keep an eye on everything. He was good-natured but nosy, a retired army guy who spent most of his time tinkering with old cars and giving me unsolicited advice. "You off again, Martinez?" he called, taking a long drag on his cigarette. "You know, your place is looking like a war zone. Got the noise down, but I'd suggest fixing that garage door. I could help you out." I waved him off. Not today, Mike. Gotta take care of something. You'll have to keep an eye on the place for me. He raised an eyebrow, leaning against his truck. Sure thing. But you too. He glanced at Sarah with a knowing look. Better be careful. Word has spread that you guys face things in the mountains. I shot him a skeptical look, but Sarah spoke up before I could. We'll be fine, she said, her voice cool but assuring. Thanks for the heads up. With that, we hopped in the truck and took off, heading out toward Eagle Ridge Road once again. The drive was long, but it was smooth, the familiar rumble of the engine beneath us almost soothing. Along the way, we stopped at a small, out-of-the-way bar on Route 46. It wasn't much, just a roadside dive that seemed stuck in the past. The neon lights flickered above. Inside, the smell of cheap whiskey and stale beer lingered, as usual typical bar environment. The place was nearly empty, save for a few old-timers nursing drinks. We grabbed a booth near the back, away from the handful of patrons. A burly bartender, with tattoos that looked like they'd been inked on during a bender, slopped us each a drink. Strangers around here? He asked, his voice low and gruff. Don't see many folks traveling these parts. I nodded, taking a sip of my drink. Just passing through. You heard anything strange these days? Any tales about the mountains? His eyes flickered, the shift in his demeanor almost imperceptible, but I caught it. Heard plenty, he muttered. Lately, folks going missing in the hills. Strange sightings, people saying things. Years of experience of serving drinks makes me certain if someone is just casual or game. You two mean business. I can dial some numbers for you, good old hunters. Everything from the folklore lurks there. Name a price, but just keep it low. Sarah and I exchanged a glance, but we didn't ask more. We had our own reasons for being here. We finished our drinks quickly, Sarah's eyes narrowing as she took in the conversation. The temperature outside had dropped since we arrived, the chill of April biting into the air. We left the bar without a word, the cold wrapping around us as we made our way back to the truck. The journey to the Blue Mountains was still ahead of us, and with each mile that passed, my mind grew sharper. The pull to figure this out was becoming stronger, almost too strong. I have to focus, I muttered to myself as we drove, gripping the wheel tighter. This is bigger than us. I can't let anything distract me. But even as I said it, my thoughts were scattered. Sarah was too close now, and I wasn't sure whether that was a weakness or something else entirely. The Ford truck rumbled over the uneven dirt road as we ventured deeper into the Eagle Ridge Road once again. The headlights barely cut through the thick, suffocating darkness of the trees that loomed on both sides. The further we drove, the heavier the air seemed to get. Sarah was sitting beside me, her fingers gripping the seat tightly, her eyes flicking from the road to the forest that seemed to close in around us. I could sense her unease, the same unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach. The forest felt different now. I don't know why we're doing this, Sarah said, breaking the silence. It's against orders. We were told to stay the hell away from this place. I glanced at her, my jaw tight. I didn't have an answer. At least not a good one. Maybe we're doing it because no one else will. Sarah's eyes narrowed, but there was something in her gaze that told me she understood. She had been part of the same operations I had. She knew how deep the government could bury the truth. We were here not because we were curious, but because we couldn't live with the questions anymore. I didn't want to think about the consequences. The military was a machine. They didn't care about individuals. They cared about control, about power. If we went too far, they wouldn't hesitate to shut us down, erase us. We drove in silence for a few minutes. But then, up ahead, something caught my eye. An elk carcass. The animal lay half-eaten on the side of the road. Its body was torn open, the remains scattered across the dirt, its organs exposed and half-devoured. But it didn't look like a typical kill. I slowed the truck to a stop, the headlights illuminating the remains. "Damn," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's not right." "No," I agreed, my stomach turning. That's not how bears kill. Or wolves, for that matter. I stepped out of the truck, my boots crunching against the dry leaves. Sarah followed, her rifle slung across her back, her hand resting near the holster at her side. The carcass was fresh, but it didn't make sense. The damage wasn't consistent with anything we'd seen before. I crouched down to examine the body, my eyes scanning the area around it. Something about the way the bones were shattered, the flesh torn apart, it was calculated strikes. This wasn't the work of a regular predator. The tearing was too violent, too unnatural. There were claw marks, but not the kind you'd expect from any known animal. "Look here," Sarah said, pointing to the ground near the carcass. "Footprints. But not the humanoid ones we had seen before. These were larger, adult dog-like claw marks, yet the size was monstrous. Is it a bear?" I muttered, standing up. She nodded, her eyes scanning the trees around us. "Looks nothing like bear. God knows what else is lurking in these mountains." "We need to keep moving," I said, turning back to the truck. We climbed back into the Ford, both of us now on edge. I could feel Sarah's eyes on me, her expression unreadable. The weight of the situation was heavier now, as if the woods themselves were closing in around us. The thought of the military tracking us, watching our every move, gnawed at the back of my mind. What if they were waiting for us? What if they already knew we were here? "You still think we're doing the right thing?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice almost a whisper. I hesitated before answering, the question echoing in my mind. I didn't know if we were doing the right thing. "I don't know," I said finally. "But we can't just let it go." The same damn question slipped both our minds 100 times, if not less. We kept driving, the forest growing denser with every passing mile. It felt like the trees themselves were leaning in, whispering warnings. Finally, we reached the spot where I had parked my ATV the last time I was here. I slowed the truck and pulled off the road, my eyes scanning the area. But the ATV was gone. I stepped out of the truck, my heart pounding. There was no sign of the vehicle, no sign of any struggle. The ground was undisturbed. "Where is it?" Sarah asked, her voice low. I ran my hand through my hair, frustration building. "I don't know. Maybe the military's been here. Maybe they erased everything." Sarah crossed her arms, her eyes scanning the area. "Do you think they're watching us right now? Following our every move?" I turned to face her, my mind racing. "Let's keep moving." We gathered our things, checking our weapons and gear one more time. The truck had been parked, and now we were on foot, moving deeper into the woods. The air was thick, like it was holding its breath, as though the forest itself knew we were trespassing on its sacred ground. It felt like the trees, the dirt, the very earth beneath us was watching. The sounds of the night, crickets, the occasional rustle of leaves, the far-off calls of some animal, seemed muted now, almost distant. I hadn't known Sarah for long, but I was starting to understand her in ways I hadn't expected. She wasn't just a fellow soldier or a colleague. She was someone who had felt the same terror, the same gut-wrenching uncertainty that I had. The same loss. We had both lost our team, our brothers and sisters in arms, that too in a place where any of them hadn't expected death. Now, we were both searching for answers, desperate to understand why our mission had gone so wrong. "How much further?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence. I checked my watch, tried to read the map to close in the last coordinates of that ridge. "We're close," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. I wasn't even sure I knew exactly where we were going. All I had were fragmented memories, a map that barely made sense in this place, and an overwhelming sense of urgency. "We should be at the ridge soon." Sarah didn't respond. Instead, she kept her eyes on the trail ahead, her every sense tuned into the forest. Her rifle was loosely held in her hands, but I knew she was ready to bring it up at a moment's notice. The stench, the same one we'd first smelled near the elk carcass, was getting worse. It was unmistakable now, a mixture of dead meat and metal, like blood and rust. I could feel Sarah's eyes on me, even though I wasn't looking at her. "You think it's still out here?" she asked. "Whatever did that to the elk?" I clenched my jaw and didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to say no, wanted to believe that it was just an animal, but my heart screamed that it was a different footprint, even more scarier. I don't know, I said, my voice low. But if it is, we need to be careful. Her eyes locked onto mine for a split second, a brief flash of something I couldn't place before she turned her attention back to the path ahead. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. We continued, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves. The smell was getting worse, and it was starting to feel like we were walking deeper into something that was more than just a forest. It felt like we were walking into a trap. We stopped for a moment, both of us scanning the area. The air was still, almost too still. It was unsettling. Even the wind had died down, leaving only the echo of our breath in the cold night air. I could feel my pulse quicken, a reflexive response to the growing tension. It wasn't until I looked up that I saw it, the claw marks. They were high up, at least 10 feet off the ground. They weren't fresh. Raking, jagged scars in the bark of the tree. I pointed them out to Sarah, and she nodded, her face tight with concern. What the hell? Definitely not a bear, I muttered, stepping closer to get a better look. No animal I've ever seen leaves marks like these. Sarah crouched down next to me, her rifle resting across her knees. You think it's one of them? She asked quietly, the question hanging in the air between us. The truth was, I wasn't sure. My mind was racing, running through everything I had seen, everything I knew. The Bigfoots, if that's what they really were, had left their mark on this place. But then, why were the claw marks so high? And why didn't the animals we'd seen before act like animals? I think we're walking into something that's been here long before we were, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Maybe things that we heard stupid stories about do exist. You remember the bar guy? Maybe he made sense all along. Then, just as I was starting to feel like we were walking in circles, I heard something, movement in the distance. A faint rustling, too soft to be an animal, yet it got us alert. My hand instinctively went to my rifle, my finger hovering near the trigger as I signaled for Sarah to stop. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but then I realized it wasn't. A small figure, barely 4 feet tall, was standing just outside the circle of light cast by our flashlights. It was crouched low, its eyes wide and glistening in the dark, watching us. It was too small to be a full-grown Bigfoot, but its eyes, those damned familiar eyes. They were wide, almost childlike in their innocence, and yet there was something unsettling about the way it was watching us. I took a cautious step toward it, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hey!" I called softly. "What are you doing out here?" The creature didn't move. It just stood there, frozen, staring at me with those big, round eyes. "Do you think it's one of them?" Sarah asked, her voice low but tinged with concern. I didn't know what to say. The creature looked terrified, but it also looked confused. Something inside me stirred, something that felt like pity. This wasn't a wild animal. I stepped closer, lowering my rifle slightly. I didn't want to scare it. The creature suddenly stepped forward, its eyes locked onto mine as it reached out with a small hand. It was trembling, but its eyes, there was something in them, something that felt almost human. "Don't," Sarah said softly, her voice tight with tension. But I couldn't stop myself. I knelt down slowly, reaching out to it. The creature's tiny hand gripped mine, and for a moment, I felt the warmth of its skin, the same warmth that one would expect from a human child. It grabbed my hand tightly, and then, to my surprise, it pointed off in the distance, its eyes desperate, pleading. "Where?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The creature pulled away suddenly, darting off into the darkness, leaving us standing there, confused and unsure of what had just happened. "Should we follow it?" Sarah asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and caution. I hesitated. Something told me we should. The creature, whatever it was, had led us this far. It wanted us to follow, wanted us to go deeper. I had no idea where it was taking us, but I had a feeling it was something important. "Let's go," I said, my voice steady but unsure. We moved quickly, following the path the creature had pointed to. Something was in the air. You cannot mistake the smell of gunpowder and military installations, lived long through it. And then we saw it. A massive military installation, hidden deep in the forest. Men in camouflage uniforms, scientists in white coats wearing masks, and barricades all around. This was it. This was what they had been hiding. The Bigfoots, the experiments, it all made sense now. And we were about to find out just how deep this rabbit hole went. We slipped further into the shadows of the compound, our footsteps muffled by the thick, wet ground. The overwhelming stench of machinery, oil, and decay hung in the air, thickening with every breath. My pulse hammered in my ears as we crept closer to the darkened building. "What if someone catches us?" Sarah muttered. "Then we go stealth mode, take it down, lost all our damn teammates for no good reason anyway," I replied. As we neared one of the rooms, we could hear the sound of low, mournful wailing. It made my stomach twist in a way I hadn't expected. This wasn't just any kind of sound. It wasn't the roar of a creature. It was the sound of desperation, of fear. The voice of something, someone trapped in a nightmare it couldn't escape. I motioned for Sarah to stop. She did, her eyes narrowing as she tried to make sense of the noise. We crept up to a nearby window and peeked inside. The sight that greeted us made my heart race. What the fuck is wrong with human beings? The room was dimly lit, and the cages lined the walls like some twisted menagerie. Each cage contained a creature, some large, others small, some twisted and malformed, their fur matted with what looked like grime and dried blood. They weren't just trapped, they were tortured. The cages were cruel, designed to contain something far stronger than a human could possibly hold. Massive steel bars, reinforced with locks and chains, held them in place. Some of the Bigfoots sat slumped in the corners, their eyes vacant, defeated. Others paced restlessly, shaking the bars of their cages, trying in vain to escape. The air was thick with a mixture of fear and anger. One of the creatures caught my eye. It was different from the others, larger, much larger. The biggest I had ever seen, easily 13 or 14 feet tall, and it was struggling against the chains that bound it to the cage. Massive steel chains that looked like they belonged to some kind of industrial equipment were wrapped around its body, holding it in place. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, wild, filled with a mix of rage and desperation. The creature was sedated, but even then, it could still barely control its own strength, shaking the cage with low growl. What the fuck? The fucking military has been experimenting on these everywhere. Thought to myself. I couldn't breathe. The sight of that massive creature, its chains, its struggle, its helplessness, made something inside of me snap. These creatures weren't just animals to them. They were experiments, tools to be used, weapons to be controlled. "Jesus," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. She reached for my arm, and I could feel her hand trembling. This explains why they attacked us in the first place. The creatures were in agony, trapped in a place they could never escape. But there was something else. As we looked closer, we noticed something disturbing. Scattered around the cages, in the shadows near the walls, were crates and containers marked with the logo of a pharmaceutical company, Helios Biotech. The name sent a chill through me. I had heard whispers of this company, its involvement in cutting-edge genetic research, its ties to government contracts. But I hadn't realized just how deep their reach went. "This isn't just some military operation," Sarah murmured, her voice low with shock. "This is about money. Pharmaceuticals, bioengineering. They've been breeding these things, taking their DNA and who knows, maybe creating weapons." I nodded slowly, my mind racing. It all made sense now. The military's interest in the Bigfoots wasn't just for research, it was a business. The creatures were a commodity. Helios Biotech wasn't just experimenting on them for scientific curiosity. They were creating a market for genetic enhancements, for weapons, for something more sinister. They've been using them to develop hybrid treatments. Weaponized in, I said, more to myself than to Sarah. Genetically modified soldiers, drugs. God knows what else. Sarah stepped back, her eyes scanning the cages again. One of the creatures, the one that had been pacing, turned toward us. Its eyes locked onto mine, and I could see the pain, the understanding. It knew it was being watched, trapped. I took a step back, my breath shaky, and turned to Sarah. "We need to get out of here now," I said, urgency in my voice. But before we could move, another sound cut through the air, a soft whimpering. One of the smaller creatures, no bigger than a child, pressed its face against the bars of its cage. Its eyes were wide with fear, but there was something different about this one. There was an innocence to it, as if it hadn't yet been broken by what the military had done. It looked right at us, and for a moment, I could almost feel it asking for help. I shook my head. "We can't save them all." But Sarah didn't move. She stepped closer to the cage, her eyes softening with sympathy. "Kyle," she whispered, barely audible. She reached her hand toward the bars, and for a moment, the creature seemed to hesitate. Then it slowly reached out, its fingers curling around hers. It was like a child reaching for its mother. There was something deeply unnerving about it. And then, in an instant, the creature tugged on her hand, pulling her gently toward the cage. Its expression changed. Suddenly, it was no longer afraid. It seemed to want to communicate something, to tell us something. "It wants to show us something," Sarah said, her voice a whisper. The creature looked at us again, and with a strange, deliberate motion, it pointed toward the back of the room, toward a small door in the far corner. It was a place we hadn't noticed before, hidden in the shadows. Without thinking, I grabbed Sarah's arm. "Don't." But it was too late. The creature had already moved away, retreating back into the shadows of its cage. The soft sound of its chains rattling filled the air as it curled up again, almost like it had been a different creature altogether. A creature trying to tell us something, not just begging for help. We stood there for a moment, the silence thick between us. The weight of what we had just seen pressed down on us like 1,000 tons. We couldn't stay any longer. The truth had become clear. Helios Biotech wasn't just involved in government contracts. They were controlling and exploiting these creatures. They were using them as guinea pigs. But it didn't stop there. There was something else, something bigger lurking in the background. We hadn't seen the full extent of their operation yet, but we were getting closer. As we turned to leave, I felt a pang of guilt. These creatures had been tortured, manipulated. They were being used as tools in a dark game, one that no one had prepared them for. And now we were caught in the middle of it. But as we slipped out of the compound, blending into the shadows, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. We had uncovered a small piece of the puzzle, but there was more, so much more that we hadn't seen yet. Helios Biot, the military, the Bigfoots, the hybrids. We had seen enough that night to keep drinking whiskey and be paranoid for a lifetime. I gritted my teeth hard, so hard that I feel I broke one. Is that what I have been a greater part of? Too many questions, yet few answers. This is just the beginning. Thank you for listening. I shall be back with the next part soon. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe. It keeps the motivation going. See you soon.